For eons of time, guitar players across the universe have shared one collective plight. No matter the skill level, genre speciality, string type, or instrument shape, despite every differing musical preference, playing inclination, or technical experience, we have all dealt with a mutual quandary. While some may claim they've found the answer to our guitar playing dilemma, no surefire solution has been offered to what can only be known as
the out-of-tune G-string phenomenon.
Catchy title, huh? Not really? There have been many explanations, but no answers. Clearly, this affects us all.
I'll say, why? Why? I must research more.
So are we doomed to constantly struggle? Are we ill-fated to live in perpetual anxiety? Are we set to steadily descend into madness, with despair and suspicion relentlessly ravaging our musical missions? No, not on my watch. Today, we will discover the truth, and the truth will set us free. First, we gotta look at the most common placements of tuning pegs on the most popular guitar headstocks. Let's look at probably the most common layout, which is 3 tuning pegs on one side, 3 on the other. In this scenario, the D and G string are at a slight angle compared to the other strings, and also deal with the most distance between the nut and the tuning peg. They can be anywhere from 5 to 9 degrees off the straight axis of the other strings. Is this a design flaw?
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe fuck yourself.
Of the earliest guitar designs, Fender paved the way, placing all its tuning pegs on one side of the guitar headstock, and many S-type and T-type guitars have gone along with this design. There are a couple issues here though. String trees, for one, which can be removed, but there's also a fairly long distance from the nut to the tuning peg. On the Gibson side of things, Gibson-inspired manufacturers like PRS made some adjustments by reducing that angle. They changed the shape of the headstock and positioned the tuning pegs differently to accomplish a more straight-through endpoint. While the slant is diminished on a PRS headstock, there's still some angling happening here, which adds tension on the G string in particular, which many may conclude could be the cause of that rambunctious little G string staying in tune. A more modern guitar builder, such as Ernie Ball Music Man, has adopted a 4 on top, 2 on bottom layout to further compensate for the G string's tuning disparity. The G string is almost completely straight here, as you can see, but with this modification, distance is added from the nut to the tuning peg, and due to the gauge of the G string, this can cause minor tuning trouble. So what's the answer? Perhaps we're looking in the wrong place. What about the nut of the guitar? There are dozens of different nuts out there. Okay, we're about to say a lot of funny things talking about nuts and G strings. Just go along with it, you filthy animals. Yes, there are lots of different nuts out there. They differ by length, width, height, nut slot height, and so on. Look, if the nut on the guitar is too high, then the strings are going to be too far from the fretboard. If the nut is too low, the strings are going to be too close to the guitar fretboard. These minuscule measurements can make a huge impact on tuning stability. The scientific reality is that the friction between a nut slot and a string is actually what can cause a majority of tuning problems. Every time a string is bent, it's moving in its nut slot, and that friction changes the tension of the string itself, and that tension is what ultimately changes the pitch of the string. So it seems like we need to be paying attention to the nut and minimizing those changes in tension. You want to make the nut slot for your G string smooth. You can file it, which I wouldn't recommend. You can find a new nut with a wider slot for the G string, but the most practical solution is lube up your nut slot. This video is just full of innuendos. Oh well, at least guitar players are very respectable and mature creatures that would never stoop to the sophomoric levels of meme lords and trolls that infect our society, would they? Would they? Anyway, about lubing up your nut. Some people use a pencil, because a pencil contains graphite, and graphite is a very low friction material. But using a pencil is a mistake, especially if you're like me and you live in a place like Nashville, or a very humid environment. Graphite actually clumps up in humidity and would cause the opposite of what you were trying to accomplish. And that's bad, so don't use a pencil. For nut lube, I'd recommend Lizard Spit Slick Nuts. Just a little lizard spit in your nut slot can go a long way in ensuring your G string is taken care of. No, Lizard Spit isn't sponsoring this video or anything, but That might be the best endorsement they've ever had. So these are the ins and outs of what makes your G string go out of tune. Regarding the guitar itself, it would be silly to not examine the external remedies, which can potentially solve our problem. Consider the fact you're bending your G string maybe more than any other string on your guitar. It might just be that you're always going to have to pay attention to tuning it up a bit. Also, a lot of people make the mistake of not understanding how to properly intonate your guitar. Poor intonation can affect much more than just an open string being out of tune, as chords and even single note lines can fall flat or sharp depending on how well your instrument is set up. I made a video during the peak of the pandemic about setting up your guitar and everything you can possibly do to make it play beautifully. It's like the ultimate DIY home setup video. I'll link it in the description because there's a lot to explore if that's new to you. Locking tuners and even locking nuts can help in the short term, but you eventually run into the same issues as we've outlined in this video. String quality plays a part, but for the overall fundamental concept we're examining, every string eventually is created equal. It just depends on how much use it gets. Consider a cheat code. I always used power overwhelming in StarCraft so I could be invincible. Consider a wound G string. Wound strings have a core string wrapped with other metal string around it. If you notice, your thicker E, A, and D strings on your guitar right now are most likely wound, while your thinner G, B, and E strings are most likely unwound. You can even see the difference. But most importantly, you can feel the difference. Some people say you can even hear the difference between wound and unwound G strings or strings in general. But it's true, a wound G string feels a little different. It's not quite as comfortable for bending, but it does stay in tune like a champ. It's a bit heavier in gauge, which means smaller vibrations in the nut slot, which means lower friction and less potential for tuning instability. A wound G string versus a regular G string comparison may warrant its own video, but for now, here's a quick back-to-back test for your ears. Keep in mind there are different ways of wrapping a wound string, such as round wound, half wound, or my preference, flat wound. It just has a little bit warmer characteristic to it. I don't know. They all produce the desired end result of better tuning stability, and they only really differ by the feel and maybe the tonal character. So here's the test. Tell me if you can hear any difference. I'll play as neutrally as possible. Ow! You cannot play a wound G string how you would play a regular G string. I will say though, check out the intonation on these chords. That's pretty good. That's why you would use a wound G string for any sort of rhythm, chord stuff. Never for lead, unless you're not bending, I guess. So there you have it. The best video ever made about the G string for guitar. By me. I hope I've provided some closure for you and helped you realize that you'll never solve this problem completely. Maybe I should have led with that. Oh well. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, keep shredding.